there are definitely blank pages that we need to fill in, and these are blank pages of, for example, the perception of Ukraine, of Ukrainian history. And when I speak about this story, one of millions, I understand that they need to be told also in Ukraine another and another and another time in the ways that popular culture gives us, but also in the ways of very highbrow novels, for example, or very good films. But also we need to find ways to explain ourselves to this another world and to find the language to do this. And it is, of course, the language of storytelling, of narration, and of symbols. But I believe that we have this opportunity right now, and I just hope that we will build a very new dialogue.
Welcome to the Covering Ukraine podcast. My name is Antonina Rybka. I'm your host and project manager of the Europe-Ukraine desk, which showcases this podcast. In this episode, we will learn more about the work of Ukrainian journalists who focus on decolonization and culture. This is a major topic in Ukraine, as the decolonization process is happening at the moment, which very few in Western Europe know about. Joining us are two fellows from our program, Bohdana Neborak and Darka Hirna. First, a little background. This episode marks the third in a series of 4, where our Ukrainian fellows embarked on a journey to European newsrooms and exchanged their insights and experiences about coverage of Ukraine. Our editorial coordinator, Sarah Lulepers, captured this discussion during their visit to Budapest. Fellows had already been to Berlin, Brussels and Paris, which they refer to in this episode. This topic of decolonizing journalism and culture had been tackled in our previous meetings.
Maybe you can present yourself one after the other,
Yeah, sure. My name is Bohdana Neborak, and I'm a journalist and manager of cultural projects from Ukraine. I'm based in Kyiv.
And my name is Darka Hirna. I'm from Kyiv, and my main focus is decolonization and history of Ukraine in 20th century. So I have my YouTube channel called Faces of Independence.
Okay. Big question to start. Can you explain how and why you think journalism needs to be decolonized?
Bohdana Neborak.
I think that decolonization touches all the spheres of the society and of life. And that means that journalism as a way of narrating stories should also be affected by this process, because you can't decolonize just, for example, history or art or education. It is a very complex process which touches all the society.
Darka Hirna.
To simplify the explanation, I would say that decolonization in Ukraine is to get rid of Russian optics of Ukrainian culture, because for decades and for centuries we were persuaded that our culture is something not really important and not something very quality and good, and we have lots of hard consequences because of it, because Ukrainians feel like Untermensch, I would say, in some way. For a long time it was, but after a full-scale invasion started, people started to read about history, to get to know Ukrainian culture more and more, and we discover ourselves. It's not about journalism only. It's about us as human being at the first place, and then it affects all that we do, and how we do. So, yeah.
I would only add that for me, decolonization is the process of becoming active as a nation, active as a citizen, active as a professional. because we were deprived of this right to be active and to decide to take responsibility for quite a long time. And we had people who struggled and even sacrificed their lives just to, for example, decide what to do in their life, in which language to speak, how to educate their children in their country. And right now we feel this process in a very huge and complex way within the whole society, because decolonization in Ukraine took part on very different stages of Ukrainian history, but never it was on such a wide scale.
It is, when you talk about it, it seems obvious to you that it's a topic, and then it seems in your everyday life. So we're in Budapest right now, and yesterday we went to visit Telex offices, and when you were explaining your specialty and about decolonizing culture and how you work, they were like, it was the first time they had heard that word. You noticed it. Were you surprised about it?
For me, it was quite sad. Still, I don't know enough about this theoretical approach that Hungarians use to themselves in the context, for example, of their Soviet history. Because what I really heard was that they speak about the Soviet occupation of their country, at least. But it is quite a normal problem with this colonial theory, because most of this theory was used to the European countries who had colonies overseas. And Russia, in this way, is not that typical empire, because Russia colonized countries and territories which are close to the Russia itself. And I think it is very simple, but still a problem to see a colonizer in this way. And also, still, it is widely perceived that mainly people of different cultures, of different religions, of different color were colonized. And Russia colonized different people, but when we speak about this connection, Russia and Ukraine, many of Ukrainians were and still are Orthodox, like Russians, and Ukrainians are mainly white. And it is very difficult to consider them as colonized people just in this simple way. So I think that we need to highlight those scholars who already did this job and explained why Russian war against Ukraine is a colonial war and always was a colonial war. And one of the most well-known is Eva Thompson. She is from Poland, but she teaches in North American universities. And she wrote a book about narratives of imperialism in Russian literature. And it is very clear from her writings. But also there was a quite popular piece by Tim Snyder, who wrote for New York Times that Russian war against Ukraine is a colonial war. And he was very strict in this position. And I think that it is a piece from which everybody can start this adventure into the depth of Russian colonialism.
For me, it was a bit surprising to hear.
It was surprising that this journalist didn't know.
Yeah, the decolonization term in Ukrainian context, because Hungary was also in the socialistic camp of countries of USSR, like USSR-friendly country, and this country was also affected by Russian imperialism. So yeah, it was surprising, but on the other side, for Ukraine, decolonization is also quite new term, on a popular level, because we started to think about our past, to work with our past only 10 years ago when decolonisation law, package of law was conducted by Parliament. And actually, we had really small time to reflect our history. But for the last 10 years, we only started to think what's happened to Ukraine in the last 100 years. And it's really tough to keep a discussion on the popular level because of lots of Ukrainian historians and experts are in military now, so it's kind of make it process really slow. So I don't, demand from people to understand everything perfectly, because I know that in Ukraine we have lots of work to do in this direction. But for me, it was quite surprising because it wasn't like the ordinary people, it's journalist who is active, who represents like independent media. So yeah, it was interesting.
We had this experience, I remember, in France when we were in Radio France, when you used that word of colonization. And there was one journalist who had studied, decolonial studied, and who knew what you were referring to. But some other journalists were like, since when do you use that term? So I think it was pretty representative of what a lot of intellectuals don't know about Ukrainian culture.
It is the question of language, but also of representation of intellectual thought in accessible language, and first of all in English. Because one of the main intellectuals in Ukraine who worked on the field of decolonization was Solomia Pavlichko. She was a daughter of a late poet of the 60s, Dmytro Pavlichko, who used to be a person from government and who did a lot for Ukrainian literature, for translation into Ukrainian, and so on. She was brilliantly educated, and she did her master's studies in English literature. And then, as soon as it became possible, she went abroad. She went to Ukrainian studies in Harvard and just to Northern America. And she kind of brought this theory from there to Ukraine. And in her texts and studies from 90s, she writes that Ukrainian society is just typical post-colonial society. Also, she uses the term post-totalitarian society. So when we speak about colonialism, we, of course, go to the field of trauma. But we also, of course, go to the field of public memory, of cultural memory. And I think that the problem was just because it was never discussed enough in the context of the countries which were occupied by Russia in English. So it wasn't a matter of global discourse, because we understand that global discourse is done in English. And even if there were some important scientists that discovered the topic, like Eva Thompson, but probably the most important one for the theory is Edward Said. And in his Imperialism, he writes that he could also have written about Russian Empire, but he decided to focus on another parts of the world. And I mean in this way that people who worked in this field of knowledge, they usually understood that Russia could be also an object of post-colonial studies. But it never was studied enough. And there are different reasons for that. And there are some reasons in foreign academia, and at the same time there are reasons connected to Russian investment in Russian and Soviet studies worldwide, because like those main scientific circles who were to study Russia never studied Russia well before, and even now they are switching in a very tough manner, and so many people don't want to change their optics.
So what you talk about, Bohdana, is the lack of work and research on that topic precisely that might explain some ignorance about it in the world. But you, in your work, this is what you do. Maybe you could give an example of the work you do, one topic that you have talked about in your work that you think could be interesting.
Darka, Hirna.
Yeah, usually in my blog, I speak about decolonization of Ukrainian military because we've got lots of USSR and Russian symbolic on our military uniform, and even in our fonts, how we represent military on the boards all around the country, So it has really... deep roots, this Russian traces. For example, we recently I made a video about Russian font called Ijitsa, and it's really popular in Ukraine, even on a state level. So our state documents operate with Russian fonts.
You're talking about fonts like the way things are written.
Yeah, like the text designs, I also talk about decolonization of public space because we have this movement of getting rid of monuments dedicated by USSR period and also Russian Empire. We get rid of Pushkin's, Chekhov's, Gorky's, and so on. And it comes from the down, people in their communities all around Ukraine decide to do this without any state permission or something like this. And it's really interesting to watch because it comes more and more eastern, closer to Russia. I couldn't imagine a few years ago that Katerina the Great will be demolished in Odessa. I couldn't imagine. But full-scale invasion is really accelerate all of this process. Also, I analyzed how Ukraine was represented in USSR entertainment, movies, and so on. And Ukrainian culture was stereotypes in this massive culture in USSR. And if you are Ukrainian in movie and viewers know that you are Ukrainian, you should be like bad guy or some funny guy, you never just a normal human, And I saw dozens of movies, and maybe one sample was when Ukrainian was really a great guy. It's about Second World War, and movie director, he was from Ukraine, and he tried to represent the brotherhood during Second World War. It was Soviet movie, but he showed all of these people with dignity, whatever, Georgian guy or Ukrainian or Russian. And after this, he had great troubles with system because he got persecuted. His son was sent to psycho clinics. Yeah, so that's how it ended when you tried to create something worthy, in culture. So I tried to show how Ukrainians were represented, and what I noticed that people my parents' age, they grew up in this context, and they comment me now that they never noticed this. They never noticed these details, and now full-scale invasion and war, it's just opened their eyes. So
Bohdana, Neborak.
When the full-scale invasion started, I found myself trying to imagine a good and popular project about decolonization, but without just retranslating all these academics from the Western academia and trying to make this conversation as tangible as possible. And it was late March when, together with my close friend, who is a curator and cultural manager, we decided to try to make a podcast about decolonization. And our chat with our producer was called like a new podcast, yet unnamed, but the name will come soon. And then we decided to stay on this name, yet unnamed, because we felt that this is the very essence of the process of decolonization, because the terms are changing and the ideas are shifting, and we wanted to catch this thing in a very ironical way. And we decided that we will make this podcast in a way of making conversations around the ideas. Like, for example, there is idea of how to decolonize yourself, because as Darka said, not only our parents were consuming Soviet or Russian or pro-Russian culture, but our generation also. There was too much of Russian music market or Russian popular culture market in general in Ukraine, and it was very intentional. And so many people around me were asking, like, how should I forget this? How should I get it out of my head? What should I do? And we were taking these examples like with very popular series, which we watched when we were kids, and we were commenting on the images, on the heroes that we have seen there. And this was our way of making this decolonization very tangible. At the same time, we wanted to emphasize that so-called highbrow culture in Ukrainian history was never colonized, and it was always on a very high level, even in the hardest times, even in the darkest times. And it is probably the biggest mystery of the history of Ukrainian culture that under such circumstances, this culture shouldn't survive, but somehow it survived. And we thought that this emotion is very, very productive for all the people who before consumed, for example, mostly Russian culture, and they then want to discover their Ukrainian identity. And this was our way of speaking. But also we did this podcast every 2 weeks, and we were able to react to the news, for example, from the front line, but also from abroad. And just to sum all this up, we wanted to do this content as accessible as possible, because not every person will go to university to study post-colonialism or to study the imperial essence of Russia, and not every person needs to. But every person can feel good from communication with Ukrainian culture, and that was that very feeling that we wanted to share.
Let me ask something. Is a lot of Ukrainians are now learning or relearning the Ukrainian language. Is it a way of decolonizing society?
Yeah, definitely. And, recently in one of videos, Bohdana said really interesting thing, that before a full-scale invasion, our show business, Ukrainian show business, were really Russified, And now, each superstar switched to Ukrainian, and we received this huge space, Ukrainian language space. We never had, until I was 21 years old. I couldn't even buy a Ukrainian language magazine in the store, because everything was in Russian language. And definitely it's interesting to watch people who switched to Ukrainian and how they try to learn Ukrainian context. Because usually Russian-speaking people, they grew up in this Russian informational space. They perceived information. They looked for information from Russia. Russia was a really information metropolis, And now they only enter this Ukrainian world. And this is really interesting, what products, what classical art they choose for themselves to discover Ukraine. And I think the language is for Ukraine is really crucial, because the best classic literature or music or classical music or movies were in Ukrainian language. So if you don't speak Ukrainian language, if you don't read, don't look for Ukrainian books, you cannot understand Ukrainian world, you know. So this is really linked.
You've been traveling across the EU for a few weeks now. You've been in June, you were in Berlin, Brussels, and Paris, and now we're in Hungary, and then we're heading to Italy, Bulgaria, and Spain. I was wondering if this journey fueled, in some way, your reflections on decolonization of culture. If this journey, this trip, has so far had an impact on how you see this topic.
I can say that it influenced my work inside of the country, but it definitely impacted how I communicate with foreigners on social media or on professional events, because there are definitely blank pages that we need to fill in. And these are blank pages of, for example, the perception of Ukraine, of Ukrainian history. And when I speak about this story, one of millions, I understand that they need to be told also in Ukraine another and another and another time in the ways that popular culture gives us, but also in the ways of very highbrow novels, for example, or very good films. But also we need to find ways to explain ourselves to this another world and to find the language to do this. And it is, of course, the language of storytelling, of narration, and of symbols. But I believe that we have this opportunity right now, and I just hope that we will build a very new dialogue. It is very important to build this new contemporary relations to the society, because identities and societies are very dynamic, they change. And that's why we need a dialogue, but not an exchange of the positions.
And you, Darka, did this trip change something or do something to your way of seeing your job?
I discovered how the big European countries like Belgium, France, and Germany see our Ukrainian world. And also, I was surprised how you look into your imperial past, you know, because French people and Germans and Belgian people, they did the big work with history, with their empire past. And I feel like it doesn't let this country to see the full picture of Russia because they feel guilty about their own past. And this point of view, I think it doesn't let people to see the modern context and the threat from Russia now. This is the first thing. And the second thing, I think that people in Europe should be aware that Russian empire didn't collapse fully. And I felt like people in Europe really afraid of Russia collapse. And I think it's quite naive because we have lots of discussion about possible destabilization in Russia. And we have an example with USSR when nobody believed in this kind of scenario. And now I see the same illusions.
So you're Ukrainian, you work on culture and you produce analysis and you do research, but you're journalists. And that would be my last question. Were you surprised by the way EU media see you, Ukrainian journalists?
I was expecting nothing, like I was open to any scenario. And it was very interesting to me to meet so many people from such different countries with different backgrounds, even from the 20th century history. I need to say that Ukraine was always undercovered because we didn't have, and we still don't have, enough offices of big media or representatives of big media in Kyiv. It really changed because of this war, because so many people were expelled from Russia, and some were taken from Moscow offices, even not because Russia is a terrorist state, but because of the security measures, for example. And some of them are in Kyiv, or some new people come to Kyiv and report from the ground. So still, I think that Ukraine is highly undercovered. But of course, the situation changed tremendously, and we have much more stories from Ukraine.
I have actually nothing to add, but I can only say that it's really great to see how Western media changing approach to Ukraine, because they hire Ukrainians, or they open the bureaus on the ground in Ukraine. And it's really important because before full-scale invasion, we had lots of Russian reporters that cover Ukrainian topic, and I think Russian needs to be decolonized in first place, So it was really what made me upset. But now I see the really great changes, and I think our cooperation will really fruitful. I hope so.
Do you have any idea, advice, or thing you think EU journalists should work about to decolonize their coverage of Ukraine?
I think that it is like about any good journalism, not only in covering Ukraine, but in covering anything. You should be open.
And maybe not focus much only about a military topic and a social topic, because we have lots of interesting to suggest in our culture and history. And I wish that EU journalists maybe focus more on cultural and historian topics, because it's really interesting, and it's what gives you the full picture of Ukraine as a not only problematic state with war, but about successful and very rich state.
So, and they can reach out to you if they want any idea of topic they can work about, I guess.
Yeah, we will be happy to help.
Of course, yes.
Thank you. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Covering Ukraine, recorded by our editorial coordinator Sara Lulepers and with Bohdana Neborak and Darka Hirna. My name is Antonina Rybka, and I am project manager of the Europe-Ukraine desk. Luba Hook edited, sound designed and mixed this episode. The views expressed by the guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the media they work for, n-ost, or the European Commission, who funded this project. The podcast Covering Ukraine was created as part of the Europe-Ukraine desk, a program that aims at building bridges between journalists from the EU and Ukraine. You can get in touch with us at eud@n-ost.org. It is in the description of this episode. Maybe consider telling a friend about this show if you like it. We will come back soon. Until then, take care.